The idea of time slips have been reported for years. The sensation of losing a substantial chunk of time in some instances, or experiencing a stopping of time over a period. Although rare, they are strange phenomena that have been reported in detail by those who claim to have witnessed them. What happens, though, when time slips alter a person's very existence, prompting them to doubt and question everything they thought they knew about themselves and their surroundings? There have been claims by people to have even arrived in an altogether different era of time, worlds away from the reality they started out in. Take the curious case of a married couple in Devon, England, who, during the 1990s, found themselves lost on their way back to the hotel they were staying at, only to discover the village had completely changed with no logical explanation. Everything appeared drastically different, and the name of the village was wrong, leading to a puzzled couple scouring the map of the area to find such a place was non-existent. It simply wasn't there. The couple were completely overwhelmed and reached the conclusion that they had somehow either ventured back in time to how the village might have stood, or crossed into a parallel universe. Is such a bizarre occurrence possible? Or is it merely an example of a genuine misinterpretation, whipping the perhaps impressionable couple up into a frenzy with the combination of mystery and the daring to believe they had encroached onto another plane of existence altogether? With reported cases detailing remarkably similar events, we would be foolish and perhaps ignorant to simply write these accounts off as bogus or fancy. A fascinating account of a possible time slip came courtesy of a woman named Lorena Garcia. Miss Garcia claims to have awoken one morning to find strange, significant alterations in her life that she swears were not present the previous day. The abnormal experience began at the point of waking, when she found her bedsheets to be radically different to the ones she had retired to bed in. But it didn't stop there. Arriving as normal for work, she was left in a state of shock and disbelief at finding the office she worked in was no longer her workstation, and although she was working within the same building, she was based in another area, working for a manager she claims never to have met. Understandably, Lorena remains convinced that she somehow slipped dimensions and stepped into a world that seemed familiar, yet at the same time entirely alien. Miss Garcia told of returning home to find her current partner gone, and in his place stood her former boyfriend, who she had separated from at least 6 months prior, going about his business, completely unaware that anything was out of the ordinary. Could Lorena's peculiar account be the result of an underlying mental illness or possible trauma to the brain? Or did she indeed wake in an alternative universe? Lorena is certain she did, and with such vehement insistence, it is certainly challenging to present reasons why this would not be possible, when this lady surely would have recognized her own life. Lorena's story is not an isolated case. This next account delves even deeper into a subject so engrossing, many factors of it would prove almost impossible to fake or embellish. It was a smolderingly hot day back in 1954 at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. There was the usual bustling and frantic chaos of travelers darting to and fro between destinations, nothing at all out of the ordinary. This was until an immaculately dressed middle-aged Caucasian gentleman approached the customs desk, telling customs officers that he was on a regular business trip to Japan, his third this year. He produced a wallet containing an impressive collection of currencies from European countries, in a bid to prove himself a frequent flyer. Officials asked the debonair traveller his country of origin and were left aghast when he, without hesitation, replied, "Taured," located on the border between Spain and France. Officers looked at each other, trying not to laugh, suspecting the man was playing some sort of prank on them, before calmly advising that such a country did not exist, prompting the slightly irritated and marginally offended man to produce his passport, which, alarmingly, was indeed issued by this unrecognized country, Taured, and furthermore was stamped multiple times confirming his claims of regular trips to Japan to be true. Taken aback with the realization that this was not some elaborate hoax, officers phoned the company the mysterious man claimed to be meeting with and were politely informed that they had never heard of this man or the business he ran. The traveller was by now becoming increasingly agitated, insisting this had never happened to him before, and who could blame him when he was clearly able to prove his claims of the trips. This enigmatic traveller instructed the officers to call the hotel where he had booked his reservation, to be met with further baffling disappointment, as it transpired they too had never heard of this gentleman. Understandably, the officers were finding this situation to be more than difficult, and to aid their investigations, one official produced a map pointing out the small country of Andorra. The traveller at this point became enraged. He was exhausted after his trip and could not contemplate why this process was so frustrating and laborious. He told them, under no uncertain terms, that Andorra was the fictitious country and the area they were pointing to was in fact Taured. Realizing they were not likely to make any further progress at this time, the traveller was detained and put up in a hotel room for the night while his case continued to be examined and probed. Things reached an unbelievable climax when the following morning, immigration officials who had stood guard outside the traveller's door all night knocked on the door to wake him, but when he failed to answer, they entered to find the man had completely vanished. Everything, his documentation, his bag containing various possessions, all gone. Officers were left gobsmacked at their findings and were forced to head back to the airport with the task of explaining the situation to their superiors. There was just no way to explain this. They had all seen, spoken with, and one officer had even touched the man's arm as they relieved him of his heavy luggage. With such a convincing account, there surely must be some truth in this remarkable phenomenon. After all, such a time-consuming prank would have required an unshakable core of people willing to keep this elaborate hoax a secret for the rest of their lives. And what would they have achieved from doing this? They were trusted officials in the first place. Scientists have begun linking this unusual case with the possibility of the parallel universe, which many believe to be a similar layout to Earth as we know it, but in another dimension. Although this unsettling story continues to mystify, for now, we just don't know how the mysterious man came to be, and unfortunately, in our lifetimes, we may never get those answers, leaving this riddle very much open. A more recent time slip was reported in March 2006 by Carroll Chase McElhenney, who had been driving with her dog from their home in San Bernardino to the sheepdog trials which were being held in Ferris, California. As Carroll drove, she caught sight of an exit sign to nearby Riverside, her family's hometown and a place she also lived for a period of her life. She drove on to the trials with her heart full of memories from a childhood rich in magical times with her beloved grandparents, who resided there until their deaths. Carroll's mind wandered to the vague memories of her grandfather, who had passed away when she was a little girl. The couple were laid to rest in the cemetery there, and as she reminisced about them, the memories flooded back to her, as real now as they were back then. Carroll was surprised as she noticed the unmistakable smell of her grandfather's cigar smoke filling the air around her. She found this overwhelmingly comforting, and following the trails, Carroll, high on the wonderful memories from yesteryear, decided to make the journey back to Riverside to reacquaint herself with the old place and to visit her grandparents' graves. On arriving, she recognized Riverside College, and her heart raced with anticipation of the homely familiarity. She then drove on to the cemetery, where she planned to sit by the graves and have a chat and reflect. Only when she pulled up, she was horrified to find nothing more than a fenced plot of overgrown weeds and wild flowers in the place the cemetery once stood. It had simply vanished. Saddened and beginning to doubt herself, Carroll drove on. She was distressed to find absolutely nothing else of familiarity. The people she encountered seemed aloof and scary-looking. She quickly drove off. The crescendo of disappointment and heartache for Carroll really hit when she arrived at the street where her grandmother and aunt used to reside, side by side. Carroll broke down to find all the houses were gone, completely removed as though they had never existed. The huge, beautiful Tudor house belonging to her grandmother, which boasted a magnificent eucalyptus in the front garden, all gone. It was as though this magical place had been replaced with a darker, more sinister version of the Riverside she knew and loved so well, prompting Carroll to believe without any shadow of doubt that she entered a parallel universe that day. Things grew stranger still when, following the sad passing of her father a few years later, Carroll returned to Riverside again for the funeral to be warmly met with the Riverside of old. Everything had reverted back to its normal, wonderful self, leaving Carroll both relieved and wholly unnerved. During her father's funeral, Carroll was reunited with old childhood friends, and happily, she visits them often, and we are pleased to report she has never walked into the strange, unwelcoming parallel of Riverside since. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, but all the while, don't have nightmares.